Okay, it's my pleasure to announce and introduce James Jones, Director of Student Services and Director of Freshman Studies from Southwest Florida College. Everybody, let's give him a nice round of applause.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me a part of the conference. This is my second conference as far as being in attendance, and I'm glad to be here with you today. In fact, I was asked to give you some ideas on what is being offered in colleges. Are they offering in classes on this type of stuff? I'm going to give you as close as I can get to that, plus I'll tell you about the class that I teach as well. But here's what, and what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the spiritualism in the New Age. And we're going to basically try to give you maybe a cultural background of spiritualism as it was introduced to America regarding this spiritualism revival, I guess, if you will, in the late 20th century, early 21st century. But current occult things in academia, as far as colleges, universities around the country, here are a few things that are being offered. One would be history of the occult and witchcraft. That's at Haverford College in Pennsylvania. Alchemy, magic, and mysticism. This is a really interesting course at Southern Indiana University. If you know anything about alchemy, it has to do with turning base metals into gold. But then it also becomes a symbolic gesture of also imperfect people being perfected kind of thing, as far as that goes. Let's see. The Greco-Roman world, witchcraft, and historiography of witchcraft in the Western tradition. That's at San Diego State University. This one was the one I found really interesting, Magic in the Middle Ages at Brown University, simply because of all the texts that are required or at least recommended. Tell me if you recognize any of these. Margot Ladner, Drawing Down the Moon. Does anybody know this? You know that one. As far as witches, I don't think you'll probably meet a witch that doesn't know that text. H.C. Agrippa, the 3 books of occult philosophy, from I guess 16th century, I think it is, when Agrippa compiled 3 different books of occult philosophy, and it's still being studied today. Aleister Crowley, his book Magic. Has anybody read this? Let's see, Janet and Stuart Farrar, Witch's Bible, the Complete Witch's Handbook. The authors of this book are witches. They're actually Wiccan, but they're not from the Alexandrian Wiccan. They're from the Sanders Wiccan tradition. I'm sorry, they're not the Gardnerian, they're Alexandrian tradition. George Luck. I'm sorry, Charles Godfrey Leland, Arcadia, or the Gospel of the Witches. Has anybody heard of this book? I'll reference it later on when we talk. It has a tremendous impact on today on why occult in the modern occult revival it had some impact. George Luck's Arcana Mundi, I have a copy of that myself. And then the last 3 are by MacGregor Mathers. Is anybody familiar with this name? Mathers. Do you know this name?
I know the name.
You know the name. He was the one that was the head of the Hermetic Society that Aleister Crowley belongs to back in the 19th century. A few more: medieval magic and Renaissance mages, religion and magic in Northwestern University. There's also witchcraft and magic in medieval and early modern Europe. University of Toledo, the occult and Western civilization at Indiana University, witchcraft and the occult and Gnosticism and the occult at the University of Alberta in Canada. So there are some ideas of what's being offered in some of the colleges. In fact, I did find another at Michigan State University. I think it's esoteric.msu.edu. There's a tremendous amount of information about the occult and esotericism and things like that. So that's what's going on across the country. I teach a course called The Occult and the Supernatural. So I was asked to come and give you some idea about how that plays regarding what's going on as far as today's interest in the paranormal, I guess. So let's take a look at this. We categorize, there are 3 primary categories of the occult. What are these? The first is spiritualism. What is spiritualism? Anybody? Spiritism is a religion, and Spiritism which is kind of a branch of spiritualism. Spiritualism really has to do with, I'm sorry? It can be. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not necessarily. But it really...
Like the transcendental meditation and the mysticism.
It does have a mysticism element. The transcendental meditation actually is a part of the second one, the New Age. Out of these three primary categories, we have spiritualism, New Age, and paganism. Spiritualism is basically what's being encountered and studied and considered here this weekend. Spiritualism has to do with communication or contact with the spiritual world. So when it comes to ghosts, when it comes to mediums, when it comes to clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentient, all those things. When it comes to the crystal ball, that kind of thing, they're trying sometimes to. And also, as far as spiritualism, also involves necromancy. Necromancy is when you're trying to contact the dead for information that will help you in the future. It's like divination by contacting the dead is basically what it is. In fact, we have, I say the dead, depending on your worldview. It's either contacting the dead or contacting the spirit world, I guess, for some, depending on your worldview, for some information that's supposed to be able to help you in the future. In fact, we see examples of that throughout the ages in prehistory, in fact. But spiritualism has to do with that, contacting the spiritual world for information. The New Age is really a mystical-based, that is some people call it religion, a philosophy, a worldview, but it's a movement, which we'll look at more closely here in a few minutes. And then paganism, there's a resurgence of paganism. And paganism is basically the earth-based fertility religion, that is the religion. So let's take a look at spiritualism. When we teach the class at the college, we do take into consideration some of the things that you're talking about here. For instance, hauntings. In academia we like to categorize things, right? So we categorize. We try to use a lot of the same categories that you do. These are the basic primary ones we use. Either intelligent hauntings, residual, inanimate manifestations, and poltergeists. I'm sure you're familiar with all these terms, right? The students in the class are not always necessarily that familiar, but we at least have categories to give them. Now, we don't try to, we don't tell them what the explanations, how you explain the mechanics of all this stuff. We don't tell them how. We give them different concepts, for instance, the ones that you do. We talk about hypnagogia. We talk about, as far as an option is to explain things. We talk about perhaps it's sometimes just overactive imagination. In fact, what we do is we on the very first day we draw a line, and on one side of the line there is skeptic, and on the other side of the line is credulous, someone who is easy to believe, right? In fact, I would venture to guess that even here this weekend you have people all along that entire line, even in the skeptic category. So I don't think that you'll find everybody in any group who is all 100% in the credulous or the believer category. I think you'll find all along that line. So we give them options as far as how to, how do the people in the paranormal investigators try to describe this? How do they explain this? We don't really try to tell them this is what it is. It's kind of like what you have. You have the opportunity to kind of make your own conclusions, I guess. In fact, it's interesting. I've been teaching the course for about 5 years. And because I teach the course, people come up to me all the time. And they have a story for me. You've got to hear this. You've got to hear this. Something that you get this all the time when they find out about you, right? Well, just this past week, in fact, one of the professors at the college, in fact, a doctor, he came up to me. He's a medical doctor, but he teaches full-time in the medical field at the college. And he came up to me and he told me, he said, I've got to talk to you. You won't believe this. You won't believe this. And he started talking about how he was in his car and the cap that was on his head. He said he heard and he felt as if somebody had flicked the bill of his cap and moved down like that, right? He said, I heard it, I felt it, my cap moved down and everything, and there was absolutely nothing around. And he had to tell me. He said it's happened more than once, that kind of thing. He mentioned that his sister has clairvoyant abilities and that kind of thing. So even he had a theory on how all this works, how it goes down, right? He had a theory. Most people try. Well, anyway, spiritualism. Let's take a look at it. Does everybody know that date right there? March 31st, 1848. This man right here knows that date. What happened on that date? Exactly. That's the night that the noises at the farmhouse in Hydesville, New York were happening. And Margaret and Katie Fox were in their bedroom, and the mother came in, and about that time, Margaret and Katie spoke out into the darkness. Do you remember what he said? How they addressed this apparition? Do you remember?
Mr. Splitfoot.
Exactly, Mr. Splitfoot. This is the introduction of Mr. Splitfoot, and this is the date that they say began spiritualism in America. But every origin has its own origin, right? In fact, we'll take a look at that in a second. But like I said, spiritualism has existed throughout the centuries. In fact, all the way back into the 5th century BC, even there's the story about how Socrates' friend goes to the oracle at Delphi and asks the oracle a question, and she asks Apollo for the answer, and the answer comes back that there is no man wiser than Socrates, and that came from the oracle. So that's an example of spiritualism, trying to contact the spiritual world. Even in the Bible, you have the witch of Endor, who was against the law to practice necromancy, yet she was ordered to by Saul, and she practiced necromancy, and she brought back Samuel. Biblical scholars are not in agreement how they interpret that, but still you see it practiced. You see something practiced, right? Well, even that date has an origin, though. March 31st, 1848, which we'll revisit in a moment. It actually starts with Andrew Jackson Davis, the American spiritualist. Who knows this guy? You know your spiritualism. This guy, Andrew Jackson Davis, was when he was 17 years old. He was in his town of Poughkeepsie, New York. And a guy comes to town, Dr. Grimes. He comes to town and he's showing everybody this new thing called mesmerism. Who can tell me what mesmerism is?
Hypnosis.
Right, being mesmerized, right? It turned into, later, it's the precursor to hypnotism, right? Later, someone who was practicing mesmerism stumbled across hypnotism. But before hypnotism, there was the mesmerism. And this Dr. Grimes had come to his town. He tried to mesmerize this gentleman here. It didn't quite work, but later there was another guy, a local tailor, William, I've got his name over there, it escapes me right now. But this local tailor apparently was successful in mesmerizing this gentleman. And when he did, this guy, Andrew Jackson Davis, even at that early age, he says that he learned that he had clairvoyant abilities and that he could access the spiritual world astrally. And so he began doing things. He claimed to be able to read books that were closed. He claimed that he could read those. He claimed that he could determine someone's illness just by his mind, being mesmerized and by his mind. He claimed that he could actually offer healing options, proposing how to heal these sicknesses, right? Well, this guy, he also had something that was important. He had, in 1844, he was apparently, while in this semi-trance state, according to his claim, he was transported astrally to the Catskills in New York. And when he was there, he says that he saw the Greek physician Galen. He also says that he saw the Swedish seer and mystic Emanuel Swedenborg. Does that name sound familiar? You'll learn more about him in a moment. Well, anyway, these two gentlemen said they were dead. They had been dead for Galen for a couple thousand years, Swedenborg for a century. Well, this guy is saying that he saw these guys in his trance, and they promised to be his spirit guides and to tell him what was going on the spiritual side. He claims that he was able to not only see the spiritual side, but actually beyond clairvoyance, all the way to the spiritual sun, is what he said. That's how he explained it. And this is what he saw. He said that he was exposed to a cosmology, and this is what he suggested. He said that the cosmology he saw was it's actually Swedenborgian in effect, and it is that there are concentric spheres, and each one is more beautiful than the next. And the very top one is where God resides. And then each one, all the way to the bottom, is more remote from God. The one that is most remote from God is the physical realm, the realm that you and I are on. And he said that each one of these realms is inhabited by spirits who are on their own spiritual journey up the spheres on their way to God. And God emanates and God permeates this entire cosmology. And that was Andrew Jackson Davis' explanation. Davis, it's not a biblical explanation but it does show you that it's monotheistic. There is a God up there, right? That's important to contrast from a lot of things that we see today as far as that goes. But one of the things we see is that he did teach correspondence and influx. That was Swedenborgian. That each one of those levels corresponds with the next and affects the other one. And the influx is that God's force and God's energy was being permeated throughout the entire universe. And in fact, Davis said that God was a magnet. It was actually a spiritual magnet, magnetizing everyone to go up towards God. And that meant that you entered the spiritual realm and still in your journey up to God, right? He believed that every human is divine. He didn't believe anybody goes to the biblical concept of hell. He believed that everybody is divine. That everybody will be making the spiritual journey up this concentric sphere. And then he also suggested the spirit beings yearn to provide us with comfort, wisdom, and guidance. In other words, the spirit beings in that cosmology, in that sphere, affect those below. Well, this guy actually wrote a book that was published in 1847 called I don't know. Sorry, I've got it right here. He wrote a book. It's kind of important. He wrote a book called The Principles of Nature. This Principles of Nature, when he wrote that, it was in 1847. But here's where it gets interesting. Because just 1 year later, in 1848, let's revisit these girls, the Fox sisters and Mr. Splitfoot. Because in 1848, this happened on March 31st, right? Well, less than 2 months later, there was a man named E.E. Lewis. He was a lawyer from upstate New York. He had heard about what was going on over in this little town of Hyattsville. So he decided he wanted to go check it out and see what is this all about. He wound up going to Hyattsville. He wound up interviewing all of the people who were experiencing this alleged haunting at the Fox household. Because remember that night, the mother asked, if I invite the neighbors over, will you continue to communicate, right? And Mr. Splitfoot's response was yes. And so they went and invited all the neighbors to come over that night. And for the next few days, they had neighbors coming by. And Katie and Margaret Fox, the little girls, about 11 and a half and 12 years old, or 13 years old, they would allegedly communicate with this ghost and answer questions. The ghost would answer questions for these people. And it was making its rounds. Everybody was fascinated by this. And so this lawyer, E.E. Lewis, from another town, he decides to come over and investigate what's going on. He asks all the neighbors, what did you see? What did you hear? What happened? He asked the previous owners of the home, because the Foxes had only moved in about 6 months prior to that. He asked the Foxes themselves to give a written statement. What actually happened here? And so the result of what he did is he wrote a pamphlet. The name of the pamphlet was they used to have these long names for pamphlets back in the day. A report of the mysterious noises heard in the house of John D. Fox in Hyattsville, Arcadia, Wayne County. That was the title of it. Well, the thing is, this whole concept of the Fox sisters and all this stuff might have died right there in upstate New York, except the fact that this pamphlet made its way to Rochester. In Rochester, New York, who lived there? Leah Fox, those girls' sister. Leah Fox looks at the pamphlet and is stunned to learn that her family is involved in something about ghosts. And then she remembers just recently she had read a best-selling book called The Nature of, what was it called? What's it?
Principles.
The Principles of Nature. Just read The Principles of Nature. And in this book, The Principles of Nature, Andrew Jackson Davis said that the dead were in daily contact with the living. Jackson Davis also said this. This is a quote from him. This truth will ere long present itself in the form of a living demonstration. He said that the interiors of men will be open and the spiritual communion will be established. In other words, it sounded as if he were predicting that this would happen. And then just a year later, this is happening. And so Leah Fox Fish says, she's imagining, is this what he was talking about? So Leah Fox, she goes back to the town of Hyattsville, and that's where modern spiritualism was born, right there in Hyattsville, New York. In fact, it's no longer called Hyattsville. Has anybody been there? Has anybody visited? You visited there. What's the name of the town now?
Is it Lily there?
Is it still, pardon me?
Is it Lily?
I thought it was that. I thought it was,
Lilydale?
That's a separate town.
oh, is it still Hyattsville?
Hyattsville's outside of Rochester, Lilydale's below.
Got it. Okay, but you visited that town. That was the start of modern spiritualism. Now, what is the cultural background of that? You have to imagine that that things were beginning to be urbanized. There were a lot of people moving into towns and out of rural areas because of industrialization, because of jobs and that kind of thing. You have to imagine they were bringing diseases, they were bringing infections and things that could actually kill people. You have to also imagine that the birth rate was, the mortality rate was much higher than obviously it is today. I want to say 1 out of every 5 children died, by as infants back in that day. So there was a big interest in wanting to know about the other side because everyone was associated with death. I know people who have never had anybody in their immediate family die, right? But in that day, everybody was associated with death to one degree or another. So they were all interested and wanted to know, how can we talk to someone on the other side, right? So that was the background on what's going on here. There was a tremendous interest in what was going on with the Fox sisters. Over the next 40 years, while they were still alive, spiritualism was widespread. In fact, there were millions of people who were practicing spiritualism either through seance or stage shows or trying to speak to ghosts in whatever way, or trying to contact the dead, whatever way they wanted to do that. But there were millions of people doing that. Eventually, rationalism and science, those kind of things, kind of took over. Spiritualism pretty much kind of didn't die out, but it really was kind of just it became a peripheral thing. But recently, in the last couple of decades, it has really been a big resurgence. There's been a big resurgence, obviously, in spiritualism. This conference this weekend, so that's what that's about. It fits in that category of spiritualism. Is it possible to contact some would say a ghost, some would say a personality, some would say a spirit, whatever term you want to use. But that's the category it would fit in. But there's a difference in the culture of that day and this day. That culture tended to be one that had a monotheistic concept of what God was or what the other side was. That's not necessarily the case in postmodern culture, in the culture of today. That still exists, but there's another philosophy that's a little bit different. Well, actually a lot different. It's called the New Age. Now, the New Age is actually a mixture between Hinduism and Western occultism. Hinduism and Western. So it's East meets West is basically what New Age is. What are some concepts that come to mind when you think New Age. Transcendental meditation is one of those. What else? Pardon me?
Yeah.
Yeah, healing. I know a guy who's a psychic healer. He heals psychically.
Sanctity of every living thing.
Right? The fact that everything is connected and sanctity, there's a sanctity there, right? What else? Does anybody know? How about Reiki? The Reiki healing is one thing. How about the fact that people see auras? That's a part of that. What about chakras, yoga? Lots of things that are permeating our society today, right? So let's take a look at this. It starts, though, back here with this guy. Remember I mentioned Emanuel Swedenborg a while ago? Let's take a look at this guy. Emanuel Swedenborg was a mystic and a seer back in the 18th century. In fact, his life is separated, clearly demarked and separated into two different categories. One is when in his earlier life he was a scientist, a philosopher, a theologian, and then there was an experience that he had, and then ever after that experience, he was a mystic and a seer. He was, in fact, he used to talk about the possibility of submarines and other scientific inventions like that, right? And then one day in 1745, he was in a London tavern. And when he was in that London tavern, he had a mystical, what he claims to have had as a mystical experience. And he says that he saw the floor turn into, there were lots of reptiles, covered with reptiles. And then he said the lights dimmed, and over in the corner he saw a man. Later in the evening, when he was back in his room, he said that same man appeared to him, said that he was the Lord, and said that he was going to guide him mystically. And so he was going to have access to esoteric or hidden information through mysticism. And then a lot of people could not understand what was going on with this guy because he was a respected theologian, philosopher, and scientist, and all of a sudden he laid that down to be a mystic. And this is his quote in his most important book, Arcana Coelestia. He says, "I am well aware that many will say that no one can possibly speak of spirits and angels so long as he lives in the body, and many will say that it is all fancy. Others, that I relate such things in order to gain credence, and others will make their other objections. But by all this I am not deterred, for I have seen, I have heard, I have felt." So every movement, they need to have somebody who is an original writer, original thinker. This is how they point back to Emanuel Swedenborg. He was a mystic. He experienced mysticism. But what is mysticism? Let's take it. I'll use this as a working definition from Gelman. It's used in academia. Sometimes you'll find it. But it's a super sense perceptual or sub-sense perceptual experience, granting acquaintance of realities or states of affairs that are of a kind not accessible by way of sense perception, somatosensory modalities, or standard introspection. So, super sense perceptual or sub-sense perceptual experience. Then, what are the categories of mysticism? There are academia, they actually try to categorize these things. How about that? We'll use Gelman's categories. One is extroverted versus introverted mystical experiences. Extroverted would be the kind, let's say for instance, you've heard people say that they have a mystical unity with nature. Well, that does involve senses, but it's not a result of senses. It's beyond your senses, but it still happens in a sense of in a surrounding where senses are in play. But then you also would have an introverted, which would be pure conscience. In other words, there's absolutely no sense involved. In fact, some people might say that all their senses were totally negated at one point. So you have those. You also have theistic and non-theistic. In other words, some people would suggest that their mystical experience is coming from God or a God, or they're connected to a God. And then others would say there is no God involved whatsoever with their mystical experience. There's theurgic and non-theurgic. Theurgic would be if someone has the intention of altering or changing whatever that divine is. In fact, in Jewish Kabbalah, which is an occult practice, there may be people who have the intention of changing, to some degree, that Godhead. And then you have apophatic and cataphatic. Apophatic is negating. Cataphatic is affirming. Basically, it's as if some people would have they claim to have a mystical sense experience where they are, they say that what I experienced, I can't explain to you. Others would have a mystical experience that's cataphatic. In other words, that would be something that is explainable, that you can actually explain. Can anybody think of this apophatic experience? Can anybody think of an experience where they can't explain it? I would say the seminal example of that would be the Tao Te Ching. In fact, Lao Tzu in the 6th century BC wrote that, and here's what he says about it. He says that even the finest teaching is not the Tao itself. Even the finest name is insufficient to define it. Without words, the Tao can be experienced, and without a name, it can be known. In other words, he couldn't explain exactly what it was, but it was still able to be experienced, according to Lao Tzu. And then also there's a precursor to New Age, this guy here. Do you know this guy? Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson. He had a mystical unity with nature. He wrote a book called The Nature. These are some of his quotes. The greatest delight with which the fields and woods minister is the suggestion of an occult relation between man and the vegetable. I'm not alone and unacknowledged. They nod to me and I to them. He said that he was certain that the power to produce these delights does not reside in nature, but in man or in the harmony of both. So already you have in the early mid-1800s, somebody who's saying that there's a mystical unity involved with nature. Let's see, let me go here. Then, how about this lady? You're familiar with this lady, right? Helena Blavatsky. She was a Ukrainian. And when she was, when she moved to the United States, she started this thing called the Theosophical Society in 1875. In the Theosophical Society, that word comes from a Greek word meaning the wisdom of God. She claimed to be able to access the wisdom of God. In fact, she claims to have met this guy named Morya. He was an adept. Tibetan adept is what she claims that he was. In other words, a master from Tibet. But he was a master in that he had gained spiritual status. He had no need for physical form. In other words, he could move astrally, is what she claimed Morya was able to do. In fact, there was an entire brotherhood of adepts called the Great White Lodge that was from Tibet, and they were all spiritual beings. And they came to her. She claims that one day in Hyde Park, London, she met a guy who came up to her and told her that he was going to give her esoteric information. In other words, that information that was hidden to everybody else, he's going to give to her. And she claims that was the adept, Master Morya. And so she began writing. She began teaching. She started this Theosophical Society in New York in that year. And so in the late 1900s, you already have Eastern concepts gaining ground in the United States as well as Western occult, because she actually practiced divination, psychic. She was a psychic medium, and she had all those. She had occult background as well, but now she's bringing in Eastern concepts as well. So that's where we find that she's one of the main precursors to the New Age, simply because she's taking occult and she's combining it with these Tibetan masters, the teaching of these alleged Tibetan masters, if that makes sense. And then there's this guy, you know this guy, Edgar Cayce. He was the psychic healer who claimed to be able to go into a trance and tell you what's wrong, but also provide healing information of how to heal. Did you know that even in the 1930s he started a hospital in Virginia, but he tried to start it during the Depression, and he had to close the doors because he just wasn't able to make it work. Well, all these guys are precursors to this New Age. I'm almost out of time, but what I want to do is just go quickly through these basic tenets The basic belief system, in fact, here's the thing. If you meet 10 different people who practice or believe in New Age, you're going to catch 10 different ideas and concepts. But there is a foundation based on, there's a foundation that most of them will base their belief on. So that's what I want to do, is look at the foundation. One of those is pantheism, which means what?
A multitude of gods.
That's polytheism. Pantheism is one.
Everything.
I mean, it's all, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah. All. That's right, everything. Pan means all. Theos is God, right? So pantheism is that all is God. So in other words, remember we talked about Andrew Jackson Davis. His concept of God actually was there was one God, right? But in pantheism, that's not necessarily the case. In pantheism, pardon me?
God, everybody's essence makes up.
Everybody's essence makes up
God.
Exactly, because God is everything, which it also has monism. There's pantheistic monism. There are different types of monism. You can actually have polytheistic monism, theistic monism. This New Age tends to be pantheistic monism. Pantheism is that all is God. Monism is all is what? All is one. All is one. In other words, there are no distinctions. The fact that I see you as a distinct entity, for me, is an illusion. That's not the case. We don't realize that it's not the case because we need the knowledge that can be gained mystically through New Age. But that's what they believe. They believe that that all is God, that all is divine, and that brings the spark of divinity. In other words, like you said, everybody is divine according to New Age teaching because everybody is one. There is no difference ultimately. In fact, I've sat down with some New Age friends of mine. One lady, she's a trans-life regressionist. In other words, she hypnotizes people so that they can try to tap into past lives, and that past life information is supposed to be able to help them in future lives. But she and another friend of mine is a psychic healer. I sit down with them and I talk to them about these things. And I say, as far as monism goes, I say, so that door really doesn't exist. And they say, right. I say, so I could walk through that door and not really, it wouldn't affect me, right? And they say, they say that that's, you believe the illusion of the door. Because you see the door there, you believe it's there. But they say it's not really there, that it is energy. You see, there's that word that actually you hear a lot in spiritualism today, or the people that are trying to contact ghosts, right? Energy. Also, that if all is one, guess what? Individual conscience does not exist. That's an illusion as well. In other words, it's all one big conscience. And they say that you must tap into that conscience. How do you do it? Through transcendental meditation, like you said. That's one way. Yoga is one way. There are different ways that they would suggest that you can do that. But do you see, that is a completely different scenario than, for instance, that monotheistic scenario that we saw back in the 1900s whenever spiritualism was gaining ground in the United States. Well, they believe in reincarnation, right? They believe in reincarnation. In fact, they believe that karma is that vehicle which gets you to the next life. If you're naughty in this life, guess what? The next life, you're going to have, not a real good experience. But if you try your best in this life and you try to be enlightened through these different methods, then you will gain a higher, more comfortable life. That kind of thing. It's possible that it depends on who you talk to. It could be hundreds or even thousands of lives before you are absorbed into that ultimate all, or the Brahman, or however you want to say it. But that one thing that we all are a part of, according to New Age, that's where we ultimately wind up. In fact, in Hinduism, they say that it's the same as, imagine a drop of rain that reaches the ocean. It was an individual, and now it no longer realizes its individuality. That's what they would suggest in New Age, that reality is like. And that all of this is an illusion. It has some similarities as far as what we talked about with 19th century, but it really is a brand new platform for spiritualism. It really has a lot of different implications as far as spiritualism in this day and age count. In fact, we only have a couple of minutes. In fact, here's what I want to do. I was going to talk to you about paganism. I don't have time to do that now because that actually has a lot of good information. We were going to talk about Eliphas Levi, Johann Jakob Bachofen, and Aleister Crowley, some of the favorites of witches today. But here's what it basically boils down to. Spiritualism in the New Age is that we tend to see today, more than a monotheistic perception, we're seeing more pantheism and monism, if that makes sense. We're also seeing scientific endeavors. We're seeing people with gadgets just like that back there trying to, spiritualism today, we have people using gadgets. We have people using science. In fact, we have many New Agers. You know what they will promote is quantum physics. In fact, have you seen the television show Quantum Leaps? Have you seen that? Well, their New Agers will suggest that quantum physics fits their worldview better than any other, I guess is how you would say it. So, in fact, a friend of mine has his explanation of ghosts has to do with quantum physics, that kind of thing. Well, you also have a culture that accepts mysticism and non-rational possibilities, which was not necessarily the case back in that's one of the reasons that spiritualism died out. It didn't die out, but it was more moved to the periphery because people weren't as interested in non-rational possibilities, and they weren't as interested in mysticism. They were interested in spiritualism, but not necessarily mysticism. But today you have a lot of people interested in mysticism as a result of this New Age. You also have a culture that is spiritual because of the permeation of New Age. So you have mysticism and spirituality being acceptable even among those people who are not necessarily spiritualists, but they do have something in common with spiritualists. In other words, the esoteric, the occult, the hidden, all those things, they're all in common. What questions do you have? Yes, ma'am.
Okay, where in this, or if in this at all, would the beliefs from the First Nations be? Would it fall under this? I know it's not New Age. Would it fall under occult? Would it fall under
the First Nations, as in
the original people
in America?
Uh-huh.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Native Americans falls under New Age.
New Age?
Yes, it sure does.
Even though it's a very old...
It is pantheistic, and what happens is they're both. Here's the thing: it's all of them overlap. Native American religion is a pagan religion, so it is paganism. However, it's typically the New Agers that embrace it because of its spiritual nature. Pagans, the pagans today typically bring their paganism from Western concepts, ancient Greece, ancient Roman paganism, that kind of thing. They like to. In fact, paganism is basically magic. It's basically magic. Every pagan has a magic, belief or practice of magic. But not all pagans are witches.
Oh no.
But the witches are pagans, right? But pagans tend to bring their concepts from a more of a Western concept, I guess, Western tradition.
Yeah,
through, like, for instance, Hermes. Through Hermes, the Hermetic tradition, right? Which Aleister Crowley and his people were also the Emerald Tablet that was apparently produced by Hermes, and that's the tablet where it starts off by saying that what is as above so below, that stuff. So that they tend to have paganism in America today tends to have a Western culture, Western occult, but the Native American religions are often embraced more so by, which is pagan, is more embraced by New Age. But there's a lot of overlap between all these three because they all fit into the occult concept: spiritualism, New Age, and paganism.
Okay.
Who else has a question?
I was just wondering, everybody that
Is there something significant?
I wondered the same thing.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any suggestion about that?
Some would tell you, and I'm saying that I believe that it's possible, that there is a vortex, there is an energy vortex, like there is in Sedona, like there is up near Asheville, North Carolina. There's places of power that, that radiate that power outward, and it draws people.
It seems to be the way. I wondered the same thing that you
Because you
thought.
also mentioned, like that place on Lily's, just below Buffalo, and the other one's just below Rochester. And the reason I was asking is I've actually spent time looking at both of those places, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, and this is the first time I'm hearing that all this is right from New York. But my life turned around when I was in New York.
Maybe it has the same. Just like in the Middle East, you have all these religions coming out of the Middle East.
Yeah,
Maybe
so
New York
maybe
has.
that's something.
It's kind of a central location for some of the spiritualistic things. Oh, this gentleman right here in the back.
How you doing?
Very well, how are you, sir?
Excuse me for coming in late.
I'm glad you came.
Did you touch on, by any chance, UFO crop circle relationships with Stonehenge and any of that going back to the Neolithic era?
I never had a chance to get there. I was gonna in paganism. Had I had a chance, I could have gone there, but I didn't have a
Would
chance.
Stonehenge fit into any of that?
Stonehenge is pagan. It's exactly.
All right.
Stonehenge is pagan. And pagan, by the way, pagan, back in that day, they didn't even use the term pagan. They didn't say, hi, I'm a pagan, what are you? They didn't even use that term. Pagan, that term didn't even come into existence until Christian time, because Christianity was infiltrated mainly in the, well, you tell me, do you think it was mainly in the cities or the countryside? When it first started, where did it catch hold? It caught hold of the cities more than the countries. And so the thought is that what was happening is that the soldiers who would go out to battle, what they would do, the Roman soldiers who tended to be Christian, it went through the Roman soldier ranks pretty fast. So these Christian soldiers of the Romans, they would go through the countryside, and Christianity had not taken root in the countryside yet. They were still the old fertility religions, but there was not a name for it. But they associated with the country folks, the rural folks. That's what the word pagan means. It's from the Latin word paganus, which means country folks or rural dwellers. That's what the word literally means.
Hillbillies.
Hillbillies. It was like calling somebody hillbilly back in the day. Exactly.
I learned something there.
Oh, see, but that's nice. That's nice to know. When most people hear the term pagan, the first thing they think of is horns, evil,
devil.
Yeah. But now we know that they're just nice.
In fact, the interesting thing is that most pagans will tell you they don't even believe in the devil, because the devil is from a Judeo-Christian perspective, and pagans don't even believe the Judeo-Christian tradition, so they don't even believe in a devil or Satan. Oh, I see. Spiritualism as a religion. They don't believe in a Satan. I see. Some occultists will say they are Satanists, but for the most part, occultists. That's about 1/2 of 1% of all occultism, if that makes any sense. Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't know about everybody else, but because you started late, I would give up part of my lunch hour for you to touch on Stonehenge and all of that. And if everybody else is in agreement.
I think that'd make a great little round table if you want to. Let me see what I can come up with. Put you somewhere. If it's just a few people, I might be able to get that little conference room back here.
It's up to
you guys just want to
That's
sit
fine.
around a conference room table and
That's
talk?
fine with me, because it's at, let's see, what time is it now?
It is 12.
Because here, the thing is, you're going to be starting back at 1:30 anyway, so I'm going to need to let you guys go. But paganism is extremely interesting.
Yes, it is.
Well, James, you give your all.
I'll be around. So
I'll be around.
we'll see if we can
Y'all wanna
put something together if you want to.
I'll-
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Could you give us the contact information for the course? I'm down in Collier County, so I'm interested in the.
Oh, yeah.
That.
Yeah, sure. In fact, John, he usually, we don't offer it every term. We offer it about every third third term maybe, and John has been to most of the times I teach that class. I teach the part of paganism and New Age. We even teach them like the voodoo and Santeria as well. But when it comes to spiritualism and the ghosts and that kind of thing, we bring John in, and he and Morgan do a great job. Morgan talks about the UFOs. It's a lot of fun. Thank you so much for letting me be here, folks.
Thank you very much.